He manages the Bourgault 2,100-acre research farm and organizes the field-scale replacement fertilizer replacement trials. The information gathered is used to assist the equipment design and testing, but also helps providing recommendations for agronomists and producers for safely applying the fertilizer and seeds. Welcome, Curtis.
Right on. All right, so let's get back to what everyone can hear me here. Up there in the back, now we've got people coming in and out. Hey,
That'll be warm after
we're there in St. Drew as an agronomist with Bourgault Industries. So we'll just get the slides up and make sure those are all up and going there. Great. Anybody know that Bourgault had an agronomy farm? Anybody know that? A couple people? Okay, a couple people. Who didn't know that Bourgault had an agronomy program? That's actually everybody else is supposed to raise their hands. So yeah, know it? Okay, that's great. No, that's great. I appreciate everyone coming down today, and I appreciate organizing committee here at Manitoba Ag Days Inc. I hope we'll get through a few things. I'm not going to teach you nothing, I don't think, but I'm going to share some of the things that we're seeing out there. And I think that's an important thing. If you're farming, who's here's farming? Okay? Yeah, who's here just hoping to have a nice quiet place out now? And relax a little bit. Okay, maybe a couple, that's fine. Yeah, no, so the whole point of this is to share what we're doing, and then you can take that information back and hopefully see what it looks like every farm. So I will warn you, I do have a few slides. So everybody over here, kind of over there, I am going to be referencing a few things on the PowerPoint. So if you want a better look, I kind of suggest to move. So we'll get going into it. I know we got about an hour, so we're going to do a few things. I'll show you a couple things, and then we'll get some questions going. But if there is anything that's really unclear, just burning, just shout it out and I'll repeat it. How's that sound? Good, good. So yeah, Bourgault has a farm. We got about 2,000 acres of commercial land. So we're down there in Brandon. St. Brew is way up north, northern Saskatchewan. So that's where Bourgault Industries is based out of in St. Brew. And has anyone been there? Yeah, there's been a few people go there. It's kind of impressive. The factory is about 700 people, and there's about 600 people in the town. So anyway, that's where we do all the farming. Farm right around St. Brew. So yeah, I got just a commercial farm. So if you can imagine, we got a Bourgault drill. Yeah, I use it. We farm right up to the factory right there. And so just to give a little bit of a indication of what we're doing, it allows us to play with the new equipment, some stuff that is getting released. We've been working with for maybe 1, 2, 5, 10 years, right? We get to play with it on this farm. The engineers actually, if you can believe it, get out there and play around with it there too, and hopefully make some improvements off of actually using the stuff. And so that's one of the goals. But one of the big thing that I want to show you today is a lot of the information that we're gaining from these side-by-side comparison trials out there. So I call this kind of the small-scale field trials. So I'm trying to combine the small-scale trials where we replicate, but on a larger size. So real-life equipment, not plot equipment. So what we're doing, and the video's coming in nice. So I've got this leading 7550 cart, and behind it is a 30-foot drill. And so what this allows us to do is you take that field, right, and I break it into blocks, just like you would do in smaller plot trials. But blocks there that are 400 feet long and then 30 feet wide. And so the beauty of this is that you get to use the equipment, so we're keeping the metering the same, the product's the same, but I can actually unplug that drill and put in a different drill. And so we're playing with the openers. And that's how the opener flows to the soil, where it places the seed, the fertilizer is obviously extremely important to what we're doing and what you're trying to accomplish on your farms as well. So some of the things that we're gonna talk about here today with these small plot trials, we'll get into it, but we're gonna mostly cue on canola and wheat, to be honest with you. We played with a little bit of soybeans. I think my average in soybeans over a couple years, I tried it 15 bushels, so I really don't think I can provide a lot of value on some of that stuff on the agronomic trials. Now there are some other things we're doing with soybeans and corn when it comes to different
metering planter systems that we're playing with that maybe we could talk about a little bit more here. But for the most part, we're doing canola and wheat on what I'm presenting here today. Is that fair? Is there majority crops, canola and wheat? Is that kind of, yeah. So what you're looking at out there, and this is a kind of a neat one, you can kind of see maybe hopefully better, you can see those strips out in the field. You can see that, like the different colors, the yellow and the green side by side. Well, a lot of that, it has to do with our fertilizer placement. And so you might be seeding, you might do a whole field one way, but unless you compare it to something, then you won't know if it's any different then, right? It might be a great crop, but if you try something else out there, maybe a strip or something, of maybe a different rate or a different fertilizer placement, you can compare it to it. And so that's what we do with these, and that's what we're going to dive into. So just to finish off how we get the data for you here, we'll take the middle 25 feet, we'll swath it at according when it's ready to go in the canola, or we'll straight cut on the wheat. So we're taking the middle 25 feet out of that 30-foot strip. Yep. Weigh it, everything gets weighed, weigh wagon, we'll take a sample, we'll adjust for dockage as well as moisture. So that's where the information's coming from. Okay, today, I don't know if the title is a little vague, rates and placement. We're going to do a little bit on canola seeding rates and then some different placements when it comes to nitrogen and phosphorus. So singulating, metering versus volumetric metering. Who all here is planting with a planter? Seeding canola with a planter, sorry. Yep. Okay. Yeah, we'll dive into this one, why we're playing with that. It kind of led into the next one, is just canola seeding rates in general. It's maybe not earth-shattering, but there's some cool things we gleaned from this and some stuff that we're going to use this information for when it comes to the other trials. Nitrogen placement, and then some phosphorus placement. Just a few things on that. Okay, so canola singulation. I asked, and there's a couple people singulating with the planter. So where this really stemmed from, up in Saskatchewan there, and I would say even into Alberta, some different places, maybe in Manitoba, that don't have planters, right? So a lot of places around here, let's say, you might be into soybean, to corn. Corn is undeniable. Planter singulation, that's just the go-to. You have to use that when you're doing for grain corn, right? But we were getting planters up in areas traditionally where there is no planters, specifically for canola. And so this was, I would say, back in 2018, 2019. So people were bringing these planters, and they're saying, well, okay, we're going to go out there. We're going to buy this specialized piece of equipment because then we can reduce our seeding rates on our canola. And I thought, well, okay. Well, maybe we could play around with, what does it do when we start playing with seeding rates without using the singulation? So a couple questions came up, though. Canola singulation, first one was, can we actually do it? So anyone familiar with a planter or the plate and with corn, sticks to it, you can do a very good job. You get that nice, beautiful picket fence, right? Just what you want. The canola seed is a little bit different, right? It's a little bit smaller. I'm going to go like this, and you won't be able to see, but I just moved my fingers by about 50% when I was comparing the two different sizes here, right? From that to that. And then so if you have different size canola, after it gets metered, what does it do in the tube? Even if the tube is only this big, that difference in weight, static electricity can even affect it. Point being, if we can do singulation, first of all, actually, can we do singulation? That was the first thing. And what we found was, yes, out of the plate, you can singulate at lower rates. You can get that kind of a picket fence set up. Okay, so that was the first question answered. Yeah, we can get there. But the second one, and then this one might be the most important, if we actually do it, does it help? Is it like corn, where you need that beautiful picket fence to get the results, as far as what's the biggest result? Higher yield, right? That's kind of the big one. But then also reduced seeding rates. So does it help when we use this kind of higher labor, I don't know if you call it labor, more intensive metering style? So what did we find? Well, first I should lay out what we did. Singulation versus volumetric. So anyone not familiar, singulating, you have that plate. Volumetric is just normal metering from an air drill. Okay, that's what we'll do with, that's what we'll say as volumetric. now you got to come down and do a jig and do all that. No, okay. The way we laid out these trials, though, stem from when the planters were coming in. Oh, he's got to answer the phone now. We got to know if Carney is, okay. So we wanted to lay this out. So I'd heard from guys using planters out in the field. Okay, you get a demo planter in. You split up the field, 80 acres and 80 acres, right? So you got a 160-acre field, 80-80. And they go out there, and they have their air drill, and then they have their planter. So they seed it. At the end of the year, it's like, well, how did it do? How was it out there? Like, what did the yield do? Well, the yield was about the same between when we planted or when we used the air drill. I said, oh, okay. But they'd say, if the guy did a demo, he'd say, but we saved on inputs because we cut the seeding rate with the planter, and so we saved our input costs on that, enough to pay for it. I'm like, oh, cool. Like, so did you cut your seeding rate on your drill? It's like, well, no, you can't do that, right? So that's what we wanted to test when I started comparing singulation to volumetric, not just at one rate, but at rates that really cut down. So what you're seeing up here, 10 seeds is about 5 pounds, give or take, depending on that particular year. But we did the same thing for both singulation and for volumetric, right? So it was kind of like we had, I don't know if there's a pointer, one treatment on both at the high seeding rate, we'll call it, and then at the mid seeding rate, and then down to the low seeding rate. So 2.5 seeds, we're down to 1.2 pounds per acre. Does anyone seed at that? No. Does anyone seed at 2.5 pounds? Oh, maybe. 5 pounds, right? That's a lot closer to normalish. So the way we set these up, and just to give the background on it, we have an air planter system, so we have the ability to singulate at Bourgault. We came up with some planter technology, but what I thought was really neat about this setup, this particular drill here behind me, was the opener stayed the same, the fertilizer placement stayed the same. All that we were changing was the way it was being metered, right? Either volumetric or singulated. And I think that's an important thing to remember too when you're looking at comparisons is, what else are you changing? So on the planters, a lot of times when, you couldn't put in starter phosphorus, right? Or it was a liquid, or we had to change something else. Well, in this comparison, everything was exactly the same, just the way that the seed came out. So what happened? And I do apologize a little bit. There is going to be a couple graphs here. I'll summarize it, but I wanted to lay it out for you. And you can find all this online, Bourgault.com under the agronomy tab. I've got all this information up there. Come find me at the booth after. So when we broke it down, red bar is your yield. Okay, we got a blue bar there next to it, and that's my plant counts right after they emerged. And then we also took plant counts later on at the year. The stubble counts. But then I was also playing around with, you can't really see way up on the side, I was looking at plants that were small. So less than about 1/8 of an inch, and I'd count those at these different seeding rates. Because I wanted to know how many plants, it came up and a little spindly thing with only like maybe a pod or two. I called it unproductive. I still had to count it in that plant stand, but I don't think it was really contributing to the yield. So what did we find from this? This was about a 3-year trial. Again, all up in St. Brew there. What did we find from it? Well, across all 3 of those seeding rates, not only the seeding rates, but even in between singulation, this is singulation, volumetric, low seeding, mid seeding, high. Man, oh man, canola is a pretty amazing crop, right? It fills in space. But the biggest thing was I didn't see a big difference, singulation versus volumetric, at any one of those levels, right? We'll dive into it a little bit more here when it comes down to the different years that we did these trials in, and I think there's a pretty cool story in that. Another thing that came up, though, go back to this, was that as I seeded higher, and it didn't matter if it was singulated or volumetric, my unproductive, that purple on the right side, that went up. So as I seeded lower seeding rates in general, doesn't matter volumetric or singulated, that unproductive plant number started to go down. So they just weren't competing against each other anymore. And I thought maybe this is where singulation versus volumetric was going to play a bigger role. And, at the lower seeding rates, maybe volumetric will have a couple more clumped together. They're going to try to outcompete each other. One's going to be unproductive. But what we found was that it's not like corn, right, where they're close and one will really go downhill. They both just kind of did better, or they both did the same. They were both good. They just filled in space the other way. Okay. So canola, our singulation summary on this, and we were really going down this path. We had specialized tubes, we had specialized meters, we had plates, we had everything. Bourgault, and we're going to go, we got to have a canola singulation drill. And at the end of the day, after doing these studies there, really didn't find there's a big difference. But you had a question. What about flea beetle pressure? Did we have much flea beetle pressure? Well, over those years, we do have some flea beetle pressure. We do treat, we did watch. I never did have to spray, so it wasn't that high. But it's a good comment there. There's going to be a lot of those comments as far as, not just flea beetles. What about frost? What about, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but it's a good question. Yeah. But the summary, and I'm just talking right now, just completely singulation versus volumetric, we didn't have a big difference out there. So no real advantage in canola. And we see that just through not as many planters kicking around us anymore in the canola-only growing part of the world there. Yeah, I think a lot of guys maybe went into it and then kind of see, well, maybe we're not getting the big advantage we thought. Is that fair? Did anyone try it? Did anyone come to the same conclusion, or kind of? Yeah? Don't have a plant, you don't plant canola anymore, or you? We might. Oh yeah. Depends if you believe me or not on this. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I'm going to go into another thing with this because it kind of evolved into seeding rates in general. And a couple pictures I'll show. This is just from this year, and I'm thinking you'll have seen this before, where these are the strips. So what you're looking at here are the strips of canola. This was a seeding trial. These are 30-foot strips by 400 feet long. I took with a drone looking down. So that's what you're looking at. The numbers on the bottom are 2.5 seeds, 5 seeds, 10 seeds, and then replicated 3 times there in the field. So one thing you may or may not notice, depending where you can see or not, is anytime there's a 10, that means 10 seeds, we were a little bit more yellow. We were going to flowering earlier, right? So maturity becomes affected big time by plant stands. The higher the plant stand, in this case, I'm adjusting that with my seeding rate, higher seeding rate, higher plant stand. The quicker it was to get into flowering, the shorter the maturity. And you can see that in all 3 of those reps out there, but then you can look at that every year that we've been looking at this. This is in 2024, same kind of deal. 2023, every time that the higher seeding rate went into flowering earlier, it was the shortest maturity. And I think that's a fairly safe thing to say if you've seen this before. But why is that happening? Right? And it's neat if you go and actually pull up the plants. And in this case, we could do it. Fertilizer is the same. Placement, everything else was the same on these trials except for the seeding rate. And so when they're side by side in the field, you can go pluck up a plant and you can compare them. And what we found was, so on your left here, you got this plant over here, right? And it's branching from the bottom, right? It's branching, tons of branches, versus if we go on the far side, we got a lot more of a standing plant, and then it branches at the top, right? And that's what we see at the lowest seeding rate, is the plant is just, it's filling in space, so what does it do? It branches. And you can see as I increase my seeding rate, this one came up. You may or may not see it, it started to branch down here, and then he kind of stopped, right? Must have ran into another plant. And then so it just says, no, we're not putting any more into branching. And that's how canola fills in space on a crop level when you break it down to the plant level. It just branches until, no, it can't branch anymore, and then it starts to go into maturity. So when you look at this then, and we talked about maturity, when I compared, that one on the left was about 6 days longer, those strips, than the control, call it, the higher seeding rate. because they're branching, you have to wait for those branches to come. So what has been pretty important, I would say, I'll call it the success of the low seeding rates in general is pod shatter varieties, because you got your main stem there, they're probably ripe for it, at least 6 days longer, and so they just have to sit there and wait for the branches to catch up, essentially. So, important thing in this, though, is it takes longer. So I think this is why there's a little bit not as important on the whole singulation. I can see how these canola plants fill in space when I just decrease the seeding rate. Well, so what does it matter if they're this far apart or this far apart? They kind of just fill in that space. Okay, so that's neat and all, but what's it really come down to is the yield, right? I had all these different seeding rates out there, but what is the yield on this? And so again, that's the red bars. And so this is 4 years of data, 5, I guess, 21 to 25, 21, 22, 23, 25, 5 years. And when I put it all together, what do we find? Again, left-hand side is the low seeding rate. As I put a higher seeding rate, my plant stands went up. That makes sense, right? I'm putting more seeds, I get a higher plant stand. But the yield didn't change. Now, I never had a big killing frost in the fall in these years. I'll say that, though, right? If I had caught one in one of the 6 days being longer, that might have changed this significantly. And always something to remember on that. But it didn't in these ones. And I think the point I want to stress in this in general is just how the seeding rate affected the plant stand, but the potential was still there. The other neat thing with this one, if you're looking at it, is this whole emergence. So as I increased the seeding rate, what I actually found was my highest seeding rate, I had a lower emergence. Lower percentage of those seeds actually survived. So when I was up to, I think that one year was like 4.8, but it ranged between 4.8 and 5.2 pounds to get 10 seeds. I only had like 59% emergence, but as I backed down here, I was getting 72% emergence. Same opener, same fertility placement, same everything. Just the seeding rate, and I think that had to do with a lot of just the inter-row competition. Okay? So let's break it down, though, a little bit more, and I think this is where it's really neat when it comes to these seeding rate trials and how it kind of works into some of our fertility trials as well. Does anyone remember, 2021? 2021. For us, it was very dry. Very dry year. I think we only had, 3 inches of rain. We're typically like 8 or 9 inches. It was a dry year. What was neat about that year, again, same thing, plant stands go up as I increase my seeding rate. But actually my yield decreased as I increased my seeding rate. So I was putting on more and getting less with that. So that's something just to keep keep that in the back of your mind here for a second. The next year, 2022, was a really good year for us. We had quite a bit of moisture. We had all that, basically nutrients from the year previous that didn't really get used up. It was a good year, but we had good moisture with it. In this one, as our seeding rates increased, our plant stands increased, well, so did our yield. So we're putting on more, getting back more. So in the wet year, the high plant stands did better. In the dry year, the lower plant stands did better. Any thought as to why that might have been? I'm going to bring her back to actually this picture here. So when you look at a plant that's branching quite a bit at this low plant stand here, lower seeding rate, lower plant stands, branching lots. Usually what you see above ground is a pretty good indicator of what's happening below ground. So we had these less plants, but they were bigger. So the root system on that, and it's hard to tell, I just literally pluck these up. You lose most of your roots actually when you do that, but you can imagine, this thing sustaining this plant, it's quite a bit bigger root system on it, versus this one over here, you can kind of see it's quite a bit smaller. So in a dry year, if you've got moisture, down below and it's going, you want a good rooted plant down there to get the moisture, to get the nutrients, right? It can scavenge a little bit harder. So less plants means bigger plants, bigger root system. So it does well in the dry years. Versus the higher plant stand, smaller plants, they kind of put more of that in just to the yield then. They don't have to build this big root system. So shallower roots, smaller plants, but they can just put it all into the reproductive, right? They can go into making seed. So they can utilize that moisture that's not very deep in the soil. So that's I'll call it my working theory. But so far, as I've been watching and doing these seeding rate trials throughout the years, as it's a drier year, you kind of lean towards less plants, and on a wet year, it's you want to have more plants. This year, it was kind of in the middle, and yeah, my 2.5 pound seeding rate was actually statistically the highest yielding on that. So I was down at about 2.5 pounds, and I was shooting for about four-ish or so. I got almost 3 plants a square foot, and that's where I had my highest yield this year. And it was about started off dry, but we got some later rains. So to summarize, I guess, the seeding rate trial here, the lower the seeding rate, the lower the mortality, which also meant lower unproductive plants. Okay, so I was putting down less, but they weren't fighting and we weren't killing each other off. The lower the plant stand, the more branching, showed that. Branching, the longer the maturity. Dry years, though, lower plant stands seem to do better, and that was that whole talk about, bigger root system, we can get down and scavenge a little bit more. Wet years, higher plant stand seems to do a little bit better. Right? Doesn't have to build that big plant, that big root system to go down and scavenge. It's a little bit more accessible. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot, Lori, right? I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you please tell me if it's going to be a wet year or dry year next year? I hope it's wet. Okay, so that's it. Seed companies are going to love that answer. We should plant seed a hole really heavy to really utilize that, right? Well, you're a better guesser. I have no idea what it's going to be. So how do you utilize this information? And that was one thing I wanted to dive into a little bit more. And so we do VR on the farm there. And I started looking at that, and I'm not as good as you. I don't know what it's going to be next year, wet or dry. But I do know where I have wetter areas in my fields and where I have drier areas in my fields. So then I started looking at this, and we've been doing some different VR on fertilizer and with seeding rates. But I started looking at the canola specifically. So on your land, you've got your hilltops. And maybe you guys are right flat. I don't know where you farm exactly. But for us, we've got some hilltops, typically drier, low spots, typically a little bit more wet. So when we started looking at our seeding rate, VRing with that, typically what we would try to do on canola is get everything the same. I want the same plant stands everywhere. So hilltops maybe have a higher mortality because they're a little bit dry, and low spots have the potential to maybe drown out. So they're a little bit, also mortality is a little bit higher. Your mid-slopes where you have the lowest mortality. So we were amping up, in the red zones there, we were increasing our seeding rate, and then down in the green, we were increasing our seeding rate. In the middle, we were keeping it about, in the mid. Well, with this information, I guess, I said, well, actually, that's not what I want. I actually want there to be lower plant stands in the hilltops where it's drier to get those plants bigger, get a bigger rooting system, and in the wet spots, then I can have my seeding rate increase a little bit to hopefully achieve a little bit higher plant stand there to utilize that moisture. And when you think about if you seed at a flat rate, typically where is the areas of your field that are going to mature quickest? High hills or low spots? Hilltops. Hilltops. So if your hilltops are maturing quicker, if I put less plants there, they're going to branch more, that's going to delay that maturity. And usually the lower spots is where there's more moisture, right? And they're going to keep going because they have more moisture. So if I increase the plant stand there, then hopefully that's going to decrease the maturity. And then when I roll in with the sprayer or swather, right, hopefully I get, across the board about equal. So that's what we've been doing on the farm. And so we did it last year for the first time, and I think it worked. But that's kind of the goal behind it, based on the plant stand in general, these trials. So hopefully, maybe it's a way you can look at it and maybe utilize on your farm. But that's kind of what we're up to. Any other questions or thoughts on that one? Or yep. When was our seeding date? For our area is about May 19th, May 20th kind of thing. Yeah. That's when we are typically up there is when we're putting in canola. Yep. Yeah, are we taking in seed size? I guess I do seed size because I base everything on how many seeds per foot I'm putting down. So I'm not taking into consideration, if this is your question, like, does one have better vigor or something like that? Yeah, so just specifically on the seed size, yes, I am taking that into account. Yeah, you best. They're TSW, 1,000 seed weight. Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question is, if you don't know if it's going to be dry or wet, what should a guy be aiming for? And this one, that's a loaded question a little bit, but it's an important one. Personally, I like to see plant stands around that 4. And I would say that's considerably lower than what a lot of other people are at. So in saying that, I guess then you have to take into account, your drill, your mortality that you're typically getting with it, to figure out how many seeds per foot you have to get down. But I just having looked at the different plants out there at 1 pound up to 5 pounds, I find that kind of in that around 4 plants a square foot is where I get less competing against plants, but yet they're big, but they're not so long that the maturity is taking so long. The other aspect of that as well is geographically, right? If you're up in the north and you're chasing frost off in the spring and it's chasing you off in the fall, well, maybe maturity is more important to you than anything. So maybe you do want to have a higher plant stand, so then you can't afford to cut down on seeding rate for plants, versus in areas where maybe you got a little bit more time, call it, right? A little drier areas in general, maybe you do want to look at backing that off. I think more than anything, what I wanted to show in this one was just, the plants, the seeding rate affects the plant stand, and then how that affects the crop. And it's okay not to be, just understand how the crop works in comparison. That's, at the end of the day, what I really wanted to highlight here. Okay, we're going to go, go ahead. Have we tried decreasing the seeding rate even further? Well, I can tell you it will drop off at 0. So I know it's a bell curve. So between 1.25 pounds to 0, we haven't gone lower than that. Yeah. It's something that we could do, cut it in half again. Most times when I say 2.5 pounds, that scares guys off. And then cut that in half one more time. But yeah, it's just going to take, that's going to be even, you're going to have bigger plants than if you go lower. But yeah. Okay. So this one, I'm going to wrap a few things kind of together, hopefully with this. Let's see where we're at. So nitrogen placement, and again, this isn't meant to be a equipment thing or anything like that. This is just looking at fertilizer placement in general, and what we've been seeing and how it affects a plant stand. So we've got that drill. We've got a sideband. We've got sideband openers, and we got mid-row banders. So I can lock up the mid-row banders, bring the nitrogen into the sideband. Use the same opener here, or I can put the banders down, put the nitrogen out. I'm using everything else the exact same in these upcoming trials here. Okay, it's a dual knife, seed on its own, phos in the sideband. It just depends on where I put that nitrogen. So what have we been finding with this? So on your left-hand side there, yields pretty much the same, statistically no difference. And I've been doing this for, well, this has been 9 years here, playing with these side-by-sides. It kind of comes and goes. But I think the one thing that's important with this, I want to stress, is how it affects our plant stands. So you can get, and I just showed you, you can get a heck of a good yield with a lower plant stand, right? Lower seeding rate meant lower plant stand. Well, we've been seeing when we bring a lot of N in close, and this is 140 pounds of actual N, so quite a bit that we're putting down. We can see that reduction in our plant stand when we bring that real tight in the sideband. Okay, and that's canola. Wheat, you don't see it nearly as much in wheat. Some years you can, but in canola, on average, we're about that 17% less in emergence when we bring that N in close. So when we look at it, though, okay, nitrogen over there on your left-hand side in the mid-row, and on the right-hand side in the sideband. But the important thing here, again, looking at, right, we had, and this year is in 2020, pretty good year, growing conditions at the start, then it kind of dried off. 8.6 plants. We had you talk about like every single plant growing darn near, it was like that. Right next to it, though, decreased plant stand significantly. And so what did it do to the crop, though? Okay, you can see it wasn't flowering yet. So when you look on your left-hand side, over here, this was the nitrogen trial. So we had these itty-bitty little plants over here with nitrogen nitrogen out in the mid-row on this side. And then we had the nitrogen in the sideband on this one. And actually I had a guy, grab this plant, right, and he said, well, look, access to nitrogen, look, it's a much bigger plant, and this is what we want, right? You're starving this poor little plant over here. But on the other side of it was, well, hold on a second. We nuked a bunch of these plants, so there was just more room, right? The crop was responding to the plant stand, not necessarily to where the nitrogen was placed. It was the fact that we killed off a bunch, and now the plant had more room to expand out. And then that same year, we were doing a seeding rate trial right next to it, just down the way. And so it was showing the same thing, right? Where if I had 10 plants on this side, and I got 10 seeds, 7 plants. I mean, they were smaller, right? And then as you decrease your seeding rate, your plants get bigger. There's more room for them to spread out and grow. So I think what I want to kind of bring together on this, on the canola side, is you have your seeding rates, you have your fertilizer placement. It's how it affects the plant stand. And that kind of goes to your question earlier about what should my seeding rate be? Well, that is also dependent on fertilizer rates, or fertilizer rates and placement of where you put it. Then it also comes into your question, well, there could be flea beetles over here, right? There could be frost, hail. How does that affect the plant stand? But what I've found, though, once you kind of get to this point, your plant stands, that's what's affecting, your maturity. Lower plant stand, longer maturity. But then your plant size as well. Lower plant stand means just bigger plants in general. So then after that, though, it kind of goes on to the year, weather dependent on your yield, whether it's wet or dry. So that's kind of what I've kind of come along to see, and I think it's a big, it's an important thing in that, to not just, say, okay, well, fertilizer placement, and all of a sudden, it goes straight to yield. Well, there's a couple other things that goes along the way. So if you're doing trials, or if you're looking at trials, for example, one I just looked at was a row spacing trial in canola, 10 versus 12 inch. In canola, and it was like 12 inch out-yielded 10 inch. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. But when you looked at the plants in it, when we went to 12 inch, the plant stand decreased. And then when I compare that to my seeding rate trial this year, well, the highest seeding rate didn't win, it was the mid one. So the fact that we reduced our plant stand then affected what the yield outcome was. And how many times, I don't know, I've heard before on a frost or a hail event over here, it's like, oh, we were going to terminate it and we're going to reseed, and we decided, no, we're going to leave it. Oh, that was like one of my best yielding crops I've ever had. Has anyone had that experience before? I've heard it before, right? And so you you kind of left it, but yet was it because you had just a lower plant stand in general, and it kind of got there? The other thing on this one, on maturity, what I've ran into too, is some years you'll have years where the plus 30 weather in July, right at the time of flowering. So if it shifts that when that flowering is happening, that'll also affect the yield. Yeah, now where are we at here? I'm gonna kind of rip through this. We have played with just going back to that whole nitrogen placement, moving that nitrogen away. We've got it on our dual shanks there, so we can actually move that seed away from high rates of nitrogen if you want to stay with that system. And with a dual shank sideband, and actually what we found is, man, you don't even have to move it that far, like ½ inch at a time. And we've actually seen, this is our kind of call it standard, is 1.5 inch to the side and about 1 inch below. And we went to 2 inch to the side and then 2.5 inch. And what you can kind of see is your plant stands start to increase. So it doesn't take very much, and you can get a little bit better emergence. So to your other question, what should I be at? Well, depending where your nitrogen's placed, then that's when you got to bring into the mortality aspect of your current system. Yield was really, about the same there. No statistical difference over the last couple of years we did it. Okay, I'm going to change gears here a little bit. Phosphorus placement, I'm going to dive into this one just for a few minutes, because I think this is a kind of a neat one when we talked about, seeding rates and placement. But what about uptake? So uptake of phosphorus. So again, we've got that sideband drill. And what we can do with it, though, I can put phos either in the seed row or phos out into the sideband with the nitrogen. Okay? So I can move the phos placement here. I can also, with that same drill, put the banders down, move the nitrogen totally out of that dual shank opener, move the nitrogen out, still using it the same, and then I can put the phos either in the seed row or the sideband in this scenario, with the nitrogen gone. Because, a lot of times it's like, well, we want to put, phos has got to go in the seed row, phos has got to go in the seed row. I don't disagree with that, but I think that there's something else, another aspect to it. And so, again, it might be hard to see. Hopefully you can see here. What we're looking at first is nitrogen in the sideband. So that's that scenario there, nitrogen in the sideband. So when I put no phos or no K, far right-hand side, you can just see that this is a wheat crop now. We're shifting gears into wheat. You can just see it was just delayed, right? It was. There's not huge sulfur, copper. You can have purpling and stuff. It was just smaller plants. They're a little bit behind. You can see that we had a phos efficiency. We're like single-digit parts per million in St. Brew. It's a gray wooded soil, not real plentiful in phos. So when I added PK in the seed row, in that case, wow, there's your pop-up effect. Yep, perfect. But when I put it in the sideband with that nitrogen, it was a little bit laggy, right? And really that was, we'll take a look here when I compare that to nitrogen now going in the mid-row. So I'm going over to the other side here. Nitrogen's no longer in the sideband. I had no PK. You had that same effect, that kind of a light green, laggy kind of a crop. Well, it didn't matter if I put that phos either in the seed row or the sideband in that case. So it wasn't the fact that it was, 1.5 inches away. That didn't change between those two openers. It was more the fact that I had nitrogen in that sideband. And that just goes back to a lot of the research I think that was done even here, Manitoba, where if you have that nitrogen band, right, the pH levels are going to go up and down. It's just not very hospitable for root uptake. Well, you got your immobile phosphorus in the middle of that. Roots just can't get there. So at the end of the day, right, phos uptake, you say, oh, I'm going to put phos in the seed row, or where should I put it, in the seed row or sideband? Well, it kind of depends on where your nitrogen is as well. So it's another aspect of that conversation. And then, that's just, we got to the point where we said, okay, we're putting seed on its own, starter phos in the sideband, the rest of the nitrogen out. And whether it's in a one pass like this, where you have 3 shoots, or if you're doing anhydrous or broadcasting or something like that, find that actually having phos not in with the seed row was almost beneficial. Close, you want it close, but not necessarily right in, Because if you have a canola seed, let's say, and you've got a prill of phos, even though phos is kind of a lower salt index in general, if they're fighting for moisture, that prill of phos is going to beat that little canola seed any day. So seed does its thing. It's got the nutrients it needs to kick out a little root. It's tapping into that phos as long as there's not nitrogen around it. So what about guys here too? And I had the conversation in the booth with a fellow here where, okay, I got a single knife and banders. Does anyone have this set up on their farm? Single knife, yeah, 3/4 inch or so, banders. And it was like, well, how do we put more phos down? Let's say if my safe rate is 25 or 30 pounds in the seed row, if I want to put 50 pounds, how do I do it? That's when we started playing around with splitting between the seed row and the mid row. And honestly, when we first did it, I thought it was more of a building thing where we were going to be, yeah, we'll put the phos in the mid row, it'll be there for next year or the years after kind of thing. Because double concentration of nitrogen, you're putting all the phos in this big band of nitrogen. How the heck is the roots going to get there that year? What was interesting, and the first year we did it, we had the drone pictures up. So what you're looking at there is just strips of canola. So the green is just not flowering yet, so it just hasn't hit maturity. It's not going to maturity quicker versus the ones that are yellow are flowering. So they had uptake of phos, and they're getting to flowering earlier. So it was doing exactly what we thought, where 0 phos, and then we had all the phos in the mid-row. They looked exactly the same. We're getting no uptake. Okay, yeah, that's about what we thought. But then when I took a picture, this is about 12 days later that year, all that phos in the mid-row, it was still flowering. So it was just getting uptake, but later in the year. And it's an important thing that we had seen this. I would never recommend putting all the phos in the mid-row, but it was just, hey, we actually had uptake. And it did end up showing up as a yield bump. So if I just look at these first two, 0 phos and 55p in the mid-row, over the 3 years we did it there, that was a considerable jump in yield. So we were getting uptake, and I think that was an important thing. So our messaging now, though, is to say, hey, put a little bit in the seed row, get that pop up, and you can put the rest out in the mid-row for your getting more phos in general in that system. All right, I'll leave you with this one here, kind of a question for you. And maybe you guys have seen this picture. I don't know. I love this picture. It's probably my most favorite picture I've ever taken. The Bourgault farm. I'll give a quick hint. This is me doing a terrible job seeding. That's a plugged run out there. So I was seeding away on that one, and I had a plugged run on there. So I was seeding this way. Does anyone want to take a crack at what all these marks are here? Straw. Yeah, well, straw is usually the first one. Stones. That's why Bourgault was built the way they are, because that was some testing ground of Frank Bourgault actually. So I was seeding away. So yeah, those are stones. So that one's a cool picture. But then I did something right in the middle here, seeding away, and this is in wheat. This is wheat, and then I changed a placement of something, and actually it was potash. I was putting potash in the seed row. And then I switched it into the mid-row because I was like, we'll see what happens with this, right? And something showed up. But the other thing that showed up too, you can see here these lines. Anyone take a crack at what those lines are? Chaff? Potash from last year? Yeah, kind of, both. That was canola swath that way, and it rained the year previous. So yeah, that was a neat one to see out there, where the potassium, leaches through the straw, right? It gets rained on, potassium's in straw, well, it leached through and it actually built up in the soil. So I had phos going in with the seed row. This was in 2019, this was a drier year in the spring. And then when I shifted out to the mid-rows, we just didn't have access out in the mid-rows early enough. In a dry year, you needed to have it a little bit closer. So that was a cool pick, and then when it showed up on there, the other cool thing about this picture, I think too, is that was only on like the hilltop. As we kind of went down to a lower spot, all of a sudden that went away. So it just kind of shows a little bit more of the placement of nutrients in general in your field and where you need it and where you don't. So we talk a lot about placement in openers, sideband or mid-row or seed row, right? But then also there's also placement in your field in general, and they can play a big role in some of the decisions as well. I won't go into it too much because I'll finish up, but yeah, it was just, you could just see plants, and I did a tissue test and it was potassium. That was different out there. So I was sitting on that little piece, but meanwhile, the guy in the other drill, he was putting all his potash in the mid-row, and yeah, that showed up on that whole half section, wherever there was hail spots there. So yeah, it was kind of a neat one, just in general. So to summarize the whole today here, a few things, I guess. I hope you take something away, but the reduced canola seeding rate, that isn't meant to be a recommendation, just a widespread recommendation. It was, when we did that, we found out a couple things, right? And the lower the plant stands, the longer the maturity, right? Lower plant stands are going to be bigger, longer the maturity. We found that there's a little bit lower mortality with that. But then we also found, in that one where in a dry year, the lower plant stands did better. In a wet year, the higher plant stands did better. So I thought that was kind of cool. Nitrogen placement. Yeah, close placement to the seed can cause decreased plant stands. But, I have you look above, lower plant stands does not equal lower yield. So there's years where you'd actually be able to go and kill off some of your expensive seed with fertilizer, but it would actually produce the higher yield for you, some of those drier years. So that's kind of an interesting one, I think. Phosphorus placement. Uptake of phosphorus can be affected by the placement of nitrogen. So just saying, where am I going to put it? Seed row or sideband? Well, where your nitrogen is plays a big role in that decision. And then potash placement. Yeah, as you can see there, that wasn't really a trial. It was just kind of a unintended thing we did out there. And from what we can tell, just put your potash in with your cereals in the seed row. Don't put it out in the mid row in that particular case. So, yeah, I don't know if there was any questions or anything now. We got a little bit of time, maybe. Yeah. Oh wow, lots of time. Sure. But yeah, that was my contact up there, I guess. You could feel free to reach out or come by the booth. We got everything online when it comes to these different trials. You can throw back my contact info on there, the other slide. But yeah, was there any questions? Any other questions or thoughts or comments on that? Yep. Yeah, have we ever tried split nitrogen? Yes. And then phosphate with the seed, yes as well. So on the split nitrogen, so in the trimax or triple shoot system there, right? So we had the seed, and we had sideband, phos, and typically nitrogen goes in the mid row. I have brought in some nitrogen into the sideband. So in that particular case, in wheat and canola, and I really thought that in wheat it would play a big role. We'd be able to it'd be bigger plant and get going. You want that nitrogen quick. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen any yield advantage and even in canola bringing in nitrogen into the sideband. So I've been trying it for a few years. I'm going to try it again next year. I really thought that would be a way to kind of push it a little bit. Seed row phos versus in the sideband. In that case, I'm actually doing that trial next year. So I haven't really played with that split, but I did play with this split. I played with sideband phos and mid-row phos in that trimax configuration, and this year it showed a couple bushel difference. So, and I don't know then if it comes down to phosphorus having two uptake sites is part of that, or the fact that banders are going a little bit deeper. And if you guys want some more, some other trials on there that we're doing is deep phos trials. Deep phos being 5 inches deep. We've been seeing in dry years a huge difference when it comes to that. So that's something you can come chat afterwards or look up later. But yeah, so we're working on those trials though. Yeah. Have we tried different phosphorus sources? Yes. Yeah, we have tried different phosphorus sources. So we had S15, 1152. We had some top phos from Timac. We had Synchro which is crystal green mixed with 1152 into 1 prill. So the way we set that trial up was we had 50 pounds going down, either in the seed row or we did a 25-25 split seed row and mid row. And because we're looking at two things, we're looking at yield, but we're looking at seed safety. So some of these products are saying they're a lot safer. And what we found on that one was S15 and 1152 were about the exact same when it came to seed safety. Top Phos was a little better. Synchro was the best as far as seed safety goes. But the yield was down a little bit on that one. So when it came to everything in the seed row. The one thing that on that trial that we did find, there was maybe some differences in plant stand, but what was most noticeable is when we split seed row and mid row, in all four of those different products, the split was always better between seed row and mid row, 25-25. And I think it has something to do with dual feeding sites and depth. Yep. So does that split have the same benefit for both cereals and canola? No. Saw it in canola. When I split it out in cereals, I think just the root structure of cereals is a little bit different, does not get out there. And so really, for safety-wise too, cereals can take a lot more in the seed row. Just put it all in the seed row. That's what we've been finding. Then you also lose a tank too, typically if you're, on the saddle tank or whatever, if you got that. But no, I haven't found a benefit in splitting in cereals. Cool. Well, again, if you have any other questions, feel free to come by or stop at the booth or chat. We can go from there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thanks, guys.
Curtis.
Thank you.